Hi everyone, welcome to today's session, and it is the correlation between neurodiversity and mental health. I'm Mandy and I'm your facilitator for today's webinar. We'd like to welcome you to this charity webinar, which is organised by This Can Happen and Employees Matter, which is supporting our partner charity Beyond. A warm welcome to everyone attending today from around the globe. We're just going to go through some quick housekeeping before we start. Our speaker, Caroline, will speak for about 45-50 minutes generally, and then we will take questions at the end. There is a question box on the right-hand side if you want to pop questions in there, and we will read them out anonymously at the end. Just bear in mind, we've had a lot of questions through before the session, so we will try and cover as many as we can. The session is recorded and you will receive a copy of the recording in the next 24 hours. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Caroline.
Hi, thank you for that. Hi, everybody from around the world. How lovely. I feel a song coming on, but let's not, maybe. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Caroline Turner, and welcome to this your webinar for today in the UK's Neurodiversity Celebration Week. So it's good timing, and there's so many conversations going on in the UK at the moment. And looking at neurodiversity and what it means to people, and the language and the terminology and the experiences of those who are living with neurodivergent conditions and those people who are allies, etc. So without further ado, let's start to talk about this super important area of neurodiversity and neurodivergent conditions. So first of all, who am I? So here's my rather narcissistic picture, and I'm sort of not really encouraged to change it because it was taken 4 years ago, and I don't seem to be getting any younger. So anyway, there we are. This is me. My name is Caroline Turner, and I'm the CEO of Creased Puddle Limited. So we're based in York in the north of England, and we supply a neurodiversity consultancy and training all over the UK and the world. We're disability expert partners to the Valuable 500. You might have heard of that. If you haven't, go have a look at some of the work that they're doing and the commitment of those 500 CEOs around the world. And I'm a former police officer. It's random. I'm not sure that you were particularly expecting that, but within policing, it was really my passion for inclusion that enabled me to start looking at the differences of service and understanding, and the gaps in our knowledge of how we as a police service were understanding our autistic communities as it was then. And as you can imagine, we had a long way to go. And even now, a lot of the work that we do here at Creased Puddle is around the criminal justice sector, and looking at how organisations engage with their clients, their customers, those people that they engage with, and are their services fit for purpose and accessible. And I come from a neurodiverse family, but then actually so do you, because we're going to talk a little bit today about what neurodiversity is and what it isn't. And the fact of the matter is that neurodiversity is everybody. But within my family, I have some neurodivergent conditions. So you might have heard of something called ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, and that's something that I'm diagnosed with. So I was diagnosed in later life with ADHD. My son is autistic and diagnosed with something called Asperger's syndrome. And my daughter is dyslexic. And my husband isn't diagnosed with anything actually, but he's definitely dyspraxic. I've just got to send him for an assessment. I sit on lots of steering groups and advisory bodies, and run the membership Creased Puddle from York with a team of neurodiversity experts, most of which of us we're neurodivergent ourselves, or we're the parents and carers of individuals who are neurodivergent as well. So not only do we bring expertise from HR, we've got our HR lead is a chartered fellow of the CIPD here in the UK. But also we've got former police officers, we've got former trainers, we've got former operations directors, all bringing their expertise in lots and lots of different areas, all viewing our services through the filter of neurodiversity. So I suppose this is where the lesson really starts about lowering anxiety for me. So whenever you go anywhere, we always want to know what to do, don't we? We want to know what the right thing is to do in any given situation. And sometimes we'll know what to do because we've done it before. Well, it lowers everybody's anxiety and increases well-being if people know what is expected of them in any given situation, particularly if you are autistic. Because if you're autistic, it may well be that you have an impaired ability to imagine what something is going to feel like in the future, what something, if you're going to like it, if you're going to enjoy it, you know, what's it going to involve? And that might be a real struggle for you to be able to imagine what that's going to be like. So being really explicit about the expectations in a given situation is a really helpful way to start bringing down that anxiety. So I'm going to give you my explicit expectations of how this is going to roll. So I am going to deliver a slide-based presentation to you, and you will listen. Well, I kind of hope that you'll listen. You might find it interesting. You might take notes. People do. And I suppose this is where the working memory piece starts to come in as well, because as I'm talking today about different things, you'll be thinking of different people that you know, or you'll be thinking of different people that you live with, or that you've worked with, that you love with, that you laugh with, all the L's. And you might just think of a question. Now, we've got lots of questions already to answer at the end. So, but please don't let that dissuade you from putting in a question in at the chat, or indeed just making note, a voice note or a pen note of a question that you'd like to ask later on, because that helps with your processing ability. It helps with you engaging with what I'm trying to say, because you don't have to try and hold it in your working memory. So you don't have to have your cameras on, but actually that's not a thing when we're doing a webinar of this size. We don't advocate for people having to have their cameras on, if I'm really honest, because if you're doing stuff in the right way, then actually you just need their ears, because hopefully they'll be able to access your content in that way. And asking those questions, we think we've got around about an hour till 3 o'clock, and you do not have to sit still, which sounds like quite a strange thing to say. But because I don't need to see your beautiful smiling faces, even though that would be a lovely thing to do. What you can do is you can walk about if you want. You can walk about wherever, well, obviously health and safety, you know, you've got to watch where you're walking. But if you have the ability to move about and to engage your brain through movement, you might find that learning actually comes a little bit easier, and that you can concentrate just that little bit more. So hopefully you have come for your talk knowing that there's going to be a bit of a structure to it, but with this one in particular, it's going to be about neurodiversity, and it's going to be about mental health. So it does touch on other areas. You can absolutely guarantee that there will be things that you're thinking of that take us outside of what we're going to talk about today. And also, I apologize in advance that some of you will be very knowledgeable about neurodiversity and neurodivergent conditions. Some of you on the call, like myself, have that lived experience. For me, it's important that we start at a very basic level. So I'm sorry if this does come across as a bit basic for some of you, but it really is that introduction into neurodivergent conditions, particularly, and mental well-being. At the end with the questions, I think what would be really helpful as well for those people who are on the call who are neurodivergent, it would be really helpful if you can tell us what your strategies are. You know, what have you used in relation to maintaining your well-being? How have you managed to perhaps work with a practitioner or with somebody who's enabled you to get to a place where you understand the inside of your head? What strategies have been useful? So we're going to take you through this next hour with, and I'm going to introduce at the appropriate point a colleague of mine who's going to give a really valuable input about his own experience as well. We're going to look at indicators and particularly, again, like I said, that what helps piece. So first of all, I want to do rattle through just a little bit of what neurodiversity is here in the UK particularly. This is kind of our view. This is kind of our perspective on where neurodiversity is sitting currently at the moment. And it does start with a little bit of language. Now, it's because it's a constantly evolving process, because it's a constantly evolving concept to talk about, then the language is also part of that ongoing conversation. But if you are assessed and diagnosed with a condition like ADHD or autism or dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette syndrome, then it may well be that you identify as neurodivergent. You'll say, I'm neurodivergent, or maybe I'm neurodifferent or cognitively variant or a neurominority. And we see neurodivergent sort of being the dominant descriptive, if you like. Now, you may also say that you're neurodiverse, and you're not wrong, because everybody's neurodiverse. But in kind of taking kind of the approach of Judy Singer, who I'll come on to introduce in a moment, neurodiversity is about everybody's brains. And some people, like I say, who identify with the characteristics of autism or dyslexia, dyscalculia, etc., might refer to themselves as neurodivergent. If you, and I can't do a hands up, which is a real shame, but if you consider yourself, and people do call themselves normal, what that generally means is that their brain is the kind of brain that is a dominant neurotype. Or some people might describe it as a typically developing brain. But generally, there is a real question now about, the word normal and what is normal exactly. And often the answer to that comes from the medical model, which definitely provides us with some structure, but it doesn't always help with the mental health element, because it's always measured in deficits, or predominantly measured in deficits. But if you do consider yourself to be to not identify with those characteristics, or you haven't been assessed, then you might consider yourselves neurotypical. There is a real step back from identifying as disabled for some people. So they'll say, do you know what? I get it that in the UK, we've got certain protections under the Equality Act 2010, but actually I don't identify with disability or being disabled. What I sometimes do is struggle with a certain task in a certain environment, and that dictates my level of disability or performance, my level of impairment, but I don't see myself as being disabled. And then you'll have some people that say, well, do you know what, actually, you don't diagnose people for being gay, so why are we diagnosing people for having a brain which is a natural variance of human evolution? So you have all different perspectives in this conversation, and that's what makes it so colourful. So this is what it is for us here at Crease Pun. So neurodiversity is a social concept. It's not owned by anybody. It's constantly evolving. It's right in the spotlight at the moment. There's a lot of back and forth in terms of understanding between the legal model, the medical model, the social model, all of that, talking about disability and where neurodiversity should sit. There's lots of different schools of thought on that at the moment. That debate is really healthy. But it was created originally by Judy Singer, who is an Australian sociologist, and she, as she says, it was a throwaway term in her dissertation, and she drew her inspiration from it, if you like, from the LGBTQ+ movement community. And it is about valuing everybody's brains for what those brains can bring, and letting go of some of that unconscious bias, challenging it within ourselves, and enabling people to thrive. And that's where it really starts to tap in to what we call the social model of disability, because it's for everyone, including those people who are neurologically different, those people who are autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, dyspraxic, etc. For everybody, including those people, it is a vehicle for that person-centered inclusion. You start with people's brains. It's not super scary. It's not super complicated. You're starting with who people intrinsically are. This is what it isn't. So it isn't another word for a diagnosed condition. You can't have it. So those with neurodiversities, you can't be it. You can't be neurodiversities. It is essentially the acceptance that everybody's brain works differently. Now, these are neurodivergent conditions. So these are absolutely covered under the umbrella of diverse brains, neurodiversity. And this is where we start to specialize. So ADHD, autism, Tourette's syndrome, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia. Now, I make ADHD into those letters, but they are attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I was diagnosed later on in life, and according to ADHD Action, it takes on average 33 years for a woman to be diagnosed with ADHD. Now, you are more likely to be diagnosed as a boy or a man over a woman or a girl with ADHD and autism. But it's interesting that you speak to the psychiatrists now, and they are saying a high prevalence of their patient numbers are women. Lots of women are starting to identify with the characteristics of ADHD and saying, do you know what, I have struggled my life. I've been called, you know, overbearing, too much, too loud, too this, too that. And actually, I talked at school. I got in trouble talking at school. I find it hard to concentrate on certain things, hard to focus. Sometimes I don't always notice how loud I am. Sometimes I can blurt. Sometimes I can swear. Sometimes I'm a bit inappropriate in social situations, a bit awkward sometimes. But I have all these great gifts. You know, I'm energetic. I'm passionate. I'm loyal. I've got drive. I've got energy. I can hyper focus, I can get things done, and I don't scare easily. So there's lots and lots of real positives about ADHD as well. Autism, there again, there's been this narrative over the years of autism being, you know, Rain Man. You might have seen Rain Man, Dustin Hoffman, Tom Cruise, and that was all that we grew up with. We grew up with the image of Rain Man from the film in our lives. There is still this unappreciation of the skills that people who are autistic can bring, and there are some brilliant abilities within the autistic community to see detail, to appreciate detail, to analyze information, to be able to hyper focus and engage with some things that myself, to be fair, ADHD, I would find incredibly difficult to understand and to engage with. And it depends which research project you're looking at. One statistic is 1 in every 100 people are autistic. Another one is 1 in 68. Somebody else is 1 in 43. Those are numbers coming over from America. Tourette's syndrome. So if I say Tourette's syndrome, people will automatically go, "It's the swearing one," and we get that a lot. But actually, only around about 7% of people who have Tourette's syndrome have the type, if you like, or that characteristic of Tourette's syndrome. And there's lots of co-occurrence as well. So between Tourette's and ADHD, for example. And then you have that used to be called, you know, learning disabilities, learning difficulties. Preferred ways of learning is something which is being used a lot more now. Used to be specific learning differences or SPLDs, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. And they are usually, but not entirely, identified in education, so in schools, universities, onboarding in workplaces as well. And that might be some challenges with coordination or with handwriting or with spelling, reading, writing, being able to get thoughts out of your head and onto paper. But also there's so much creativity in that community as well. So you've got even specialist units in some of the big universities in the UK specifically set up so that the universities can help tap into the creative, often genius, that is brought with those brilliant different thinkers. So yes, there are some challenges, and yes, there are some significant blockers to people accessing this predominantly neurotypical world. But we need to, because of the talents and the skills that are going to waste as a result of those challenges. So where's it been? Is this just a new thing? Is this just a new concept? Well, no, it isn't. If you go back even to the Paleolithic period, there's a research project being done by the University of York that looking at the skill sets of autistic cave drawers, mapping across to the autistic artistic talents of today. And showing that there's always been this ability to analyse and produce amazing work through the years. And there you've got George Sill, you've got Rudolf Berlin, Hans Asperger. I've just been talking about Asperger's. All historical clinicians that started noticing how the brain seems to be working differently, and in some cases how that there seems to be a real skill set involved in those neurological differences, but also recognizing that those challenges are where they are. And as we grow and our knowledge grows, there seems to be this blend now, moreover, of the medical model, which is where these gentlemen were coming from, and also the inclusion model, which is where we come from here in Crease Puddle. That's very much our perspective. And we see a nice blend now coming through of the understanding of the head, but it also being appreciated about, what people can bring to workplaces and beyond. So we adopt this. So this is ours. It's never changed since we started Crease Puddle back in 2017. And it's acceptance that everybody's brain works differently. How you live, how you love, how you laugh, how you engage with the world, everybody. And making sure that if we can minimize those challenges, but also make the best of the top of that spiky profile, that we do just that. Because what we want to move from is this negative narrative. We want to move from talking about, disorders and deficits because of that exclusion piece. And this is where we start to move in to the mental health element. So try and remember the exclusion piece there, because people have been excluded. In fact, the main reason or the demographic that has been excluded from education in the UK are those children with special educational needs. We want to get to a place where, do you know what? There's some understanding, there's some acceptance, some curiosity. Let's start this conversation. That's where knowledge can grow, where we can swap some best practice, where we can start to understand the challenges and start to, kind of work together and collaborate. Because ultimately, we want to get to a place where this is our everyday, where it's just part of, we understand that people think differently, work differently, love differently, and that actually there's a skill set involved in tapping into different people for different reasons in order to get the best out of them and help them to thrive. So, remembering all of that, let's move into neurodivergence and mental health. Now, do you even know? Now, it's the disclosure piece for me is, this is a short skip through. We've got an hour, so it's all going to be quite light touch. But let's just talk about why people would tell you that actually they were struggling. So maybe they're ADHD and they're struggling. Maybe they're autistic and they've got some anxiety issues. Maybe they'll say, I'm dyslexic and I'm suffering with depression. Maybe they'll use terminology like that. And it doesn't have to be in a workplace. This could be in a family environment. This could be in your friendship group. This could be anywhere that actually you notice that there's something going on for somebody. Maybe there's some indicator that you could read that could be a little red flag for you, and we'll come on to some of those in a little while. But it may well be that they do not recognize that in themselves, that they have not noticed that there is something going on for them, that and as a result they don't have the words, the language, the ability to narrate that, because they're not experiencing it. It may well be other people can tell that there's something going on for them, but they're not experiencing it or conscious of that experience. It may well be that they are diagnosed or they identify with the characteristics of a condition, but they're not telling you. And it may well be because they don't feel safe enough to do that. And what we know is that the reasons why somebody won't disclose in a family or a criminal justice sector environment, or in a workplace or in a friendship group, actually there's a huge amount of overlap there. And it boils down to things like fear of discrimination, fear of being babied, fear of being treated unequally or differently, fear of being rejected, fear of people making assumptions about the condition itself, just wanted to keep it private and it's nobody else's business, which is fair enough. Also things like not having to explain it over and over again, you know, so if you say, oh, I'm autistic, then not having to go into a whole great big narrative every single time you do that. So we know that there are correlations between a disclosure across the board and why people don't. But the reality is that if somebody does disclose because they do identify with those characteristics or they have been assessed and they're autistic or ADHD, then actually at that point, whoever is receiving that disclosure, an organisation, or maybe it's you as a husband or a wife or a dad or a sister or a brother, you've got choices at that point. You can either handle it well and know what you're going to do with that information, or you don't. And we've got some great examples of both of that happening. Sometimes it can go really well and sometimes not so. And if it doesn't go well and it's not received well, or certainly if the skill set isn't there, then that can absolutely contribute to mental unwellness. I apologise for this slide. It's black on white. It's not neurodivergent friendly, but it's to give you an idea of just a very small proportion of the statistics that are out there in relation to neurodivergence and mental well-being. And you know what? You could carry on. I could fill 10 slides. And that is a really sad bit about this piece of work. Reading statistics like 70% of young people experience mental health issues. Death by suicide in the autistic population is not always recognised, and sometimes that there is this it's particularly in the UK, and these are Autistica is a UK-based charity, but without doubt the lessons will apply elsewhere. Looking at in the UK, what you tend to find is that or can find is that the mental health services will say, well, that's an autistic problem, and the autism charities or the autism support groups will say, well, that needs going back to mental health. And what we don't have is this intersectionality expertise that we so greatly need in the UK to understand the intersectionality of neurodivergence and also mental health in terms of anxiety, depression, suicide ideation, self-harm, etc. For me, this is a grim statistic, and I apologise if any of this is triggering for anybody on the call. Certainly the next slide I will introduce sensitively. But pre and post lockdown, 25% of all child deaths by suicide are children, ADHD and autistic. 25%. That's scary. And what is it about those children that made them feel like they had no way out? ADHD, 18% of those with ADHD have attempted suicide. Individuals with ADHD, 40 to 42%, what they call comorbid or co-occurring with anxiety and depression. It's actually, some statistics are actually higher than that as well. So when we're looking in our organisations, or we're looking at the services that we provide, and we're with that bias of mental well-being, then we need to be inviting people who are neurodivergent to that initial discussion. Because if you can support and tap into people who are neurodivergent, by default, you will get it right for everybody else. So we need to make sure that those initial conversations, that initial kind of, design process involves people with that lived experience. It involves experts who can provide those case studies, that academic research to show that actually you've got people who are neurodivergent that have provided some valuable inputs in the past, and you can grow some really solid, really valuable inputs and initiatives off the back of that. The following slide are straight lifts from our workplace assessments. And one or two of them could be quite triggering. So I'll give you the heads up now that that could be the case. But just to show you that you might be seeing, as somebody living with, loving with, working with somebody who's neurodivergent, you might be seeing one side of them, and that side of them might be deploying very, very strong coping strategies, or indeed what we would call masking, which is where that person is effectively masking their true self, emulating neurotypical characteristics, and it is exhausting, and it massively creates overwhelm and fatigue. Underneath, there's a whole host of stuff going on, and I think this is a really valuable slide in showing you some of the words and language which is used when we do some of our workplace assessments. Everyone just gets on. I sit there and I know they think I'm weird. I had a line manager that would shake my chair as he went past. I lived in dread of that. Work have this wellbeing policy. They do social events, but none of it applies to me. I'd planned my death in detail, but when I went to B&Q, they didn't have the rope thickness I wanted. That saved my life that day. I go to work and try to survive it every day. Appraisals are just a test of being neurotypical. Fake it till you, I won't swear out loud, it up, which I usually do. Calling me the office nerd in an affectionate way isn't affection. I just don't want people to judge me. It's like I live in the conservatory and the rest of the world is in the house. Toilets are my sanctuary. I know they think I have an illness. I spend my breaks in there. Nowhere am I telling my manager I'm struggling. They'd just take the PISS. If everyone was allowed to wear earphones, then I wouldn't feel as weird. I just mask all the time. It's exhausting, and if I stopped it, they would just sack me. I don't think anyone wants to work in a place where staff feel like that, do they? I know I wouldn't. Okay, but why? And this, again, is just a small snapshot of why people who are neurodivergent experience mental health challenges. Because of that exclusion piece, because of isolation as a result. Shame and ADHD is a term which is used very often side by side. Rejection sensitive dysphoria is something which lots of people with ADHD have, and it is something which again can bring shame. It can bring feelings of low self-esteem, and also not feeling valued, and effectively being quite feeling as though people are rejecting you and not appreciating what you can bring. Abuse or unequal, unhealthy relationships also. Those relationships which actually, if you're autistic and you struggle with understanding the motivations why somebody might want you to do certain things, actually, that might be called theory of mind in a medical term. But actually, if they're telling you that something is a healthy relationship, or this is just the way our relationship works, then actually, and you're believing that, then potentially you're in an abusive, coercive, unequitable relationship, which is not healthy for anybody. Maybe if you're autistic, this rigidity of thought might contribute to it. So it may well be that actually you see a death by suicide as being the only way out. And actually, that might be because of an impaired ability or a reduced ability to think of different alternatives, then that might contribute to it. Low self-esteem, as per neurotypical people as well. Maybe it's an inaccessible workplace where you're going in every day, and this sensory overwhelm about the environment which you have to navigate just depletes you over and over and over again. Maybe you're just getting passed over for promotion because you don't understand the way the questions are being phrased, or the environment which you're being asked to work in is too busy, too distracting, for example. Maybe it's about the fact that you have some real challenges recognizing emotions within you, so something called alexithymia. So whereby you'll go from sort of nothing to to DEFCON 5. People might describe it as an explosion, as a sensory overload, and you just didn't feel it coming on. That suddenly you felt you were okay, but then you really weren't. And I could go on and I could go into so much more detail, but that's just an idea around some of the reasons why. The following video, I appreciate, we've just tried it. We tried the tech piece earlier on. It may well be that it's quite quiet, and I apologise for that. It's on YouTube if you want to have a look, or on the Autistica website if you want to go away and have a little look at that afterwards. But it does have captions if you are able to read the captions.
Anxiety is a feeling of worry or fear. Our minds and our bodies can be affected when we're anxious. But learning about the causes and symptoms can help us manage it better. Anxiety usually happens when we expect that a situation might affect us in a negative way. Most people feel anxious at some point in their lives. In fact, anxiety can actually help us to stay alert and safe. But when anxiety sticks around and stops you from doing things and enjoying life, it becomes a problem. Autistic people are 4 times more likely to have anxiety than non-autistic people, and often standard therapies don't work so well. New research suggests 4 main reasons why. First is sensory processing. We experience sound, touch, smell, and light differently. It's why a busy open-plan office might be really difficult. Then there's alexithymia. We can struggle to understand and describe our emotions. It means we might not manage them well, so we can get completely overwhelmed. Another big cause of anxiety is understanding others. We can feel anxious in social situations, especially if others don't understand us. For all these reasons, the world for us can feel uncertain. Our difficulty with uncertainty is why we really struggle with change and unpredictable situations. Everyone experiences anxiety differently. Some might avoid situations or seem moody and quiet, whereas others can just become really chatty. Some might show they're anxious with stimming, that's repeating words or behaviours. They might help, but they can get in the way. We know all of this because of research. Scientists are using this information to find new treatments and adapt existing ones. Research is working out what works for each individual and helping us to understand ourselves better too. With this knowledge, we can make breakthroughs that change lives. You can help to make more breakthroughs. Get involved and donate now.
Hopefully you got to hear that, and to sort of evidence this, we really wanted to bring in that lived experience. So without further ado, I'd like to invite my co-presenter, Jack, to this conversation. Jack, are you there?
I am, yeah. It's just, can you hear me all right?
Yep, absolutely. Sure.
Suddenly just gone a bit fuzzy on the old, just right now, it just has to, doesn't it? There we go. No, thanks for bringing me in. And it's hard to just crack on like a machine after that. What you just shared is highly impactful, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call are feeling that same heaviness of what we've just read and seen in the research. Powerful stuff. Some of it feels very personal to me as well. So I'm Jack. I'm really grateful to be on this. Thanks, Caroline, for having me. I hope what I say is of value. I'll keep it quite short. And we've been quite explicit. Caroline's going to keep me on schedule, and that's something that quite often people with ADHD need. I work for Yahoo. That T-shirt, I promise you, is always up on the wall. It's not just a shameless plug. I've got the T-shirt. It looks good against the brick. I thought, there we go. I am diagnosed with ADHD. I definitely, relate to the characteristics of OCD and Tourette's, and quite a few other comorbidities. But that's what the main disorder I was diagnosed with at 36, and I'm 39 now, just. So it's very recent, and most of my life, undiagnosed, and what came along with that was a lot of depression and anxiety. I'm married to Liz. We've been together 15 years this summer. No, so we've been married 15 years this summer. Been together for about 20. And we have 3 girls, T and Chloe and Hannah, and a dog and a cat. It's quite busy here. I'm quite jittery on the video, Caroline, so I'm just going to trust you that I'm coming across smoothly. Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear anything. All good?
Yeah,
okay,
all
cool.
Good. Yeah, absolutely.
I've got 3 things to talk to you about in this short time, and I think in my head, given them sort of subtitles of pre-diagnosis, post-diagnosis, and what helps, which go in and around these slides that Caroline's put together. And I think really, in a nutshell, and I'm always available, looking up on LinkedIn if you want to talk more about this stuff. I'm very open about it. The title of the first bit really for me is messy, because as 36 years of undiagnosis means that for me, as a child, I was disruptive. I was often labelled a nuisance. Me and school didn't get on very well. I was intelligent, but disruptive. And so all my school reports used to say the same thing, which is for 10 minutes, Jack would be the best in the class, and then he'd go missing, either literally or figuratively. It was just, and then causing problems, and then having to sit outside, and then sit in, special extra learning classes. And then I was lucky enough to go to a posh school for a couple of years, because my dad, who'd done well in fruit and veg, decided to send me there, but that all went wrong after 2 years. There were issues there, but what I loved there was the discipline and routine that I didn't have at home. It was really useful, and I found that incredibly powerful. When I came back from that school at 14, starting again, making friends, everything went rapidly downhill. Lack of routine, lack of discipline, and lack of support meant that I ended up slipping into taking drugs and over drinking and smoking, getting in trouble with the law. I was complete, pest, basically. That's how I would describe myself. And some of that stuff still lives with me. Caroline mentioned about shame being interlinked with ADHD. Well, shame follows me all the time with things like that. So that's what that looks like. It's messy, it's unbridled, it's all over the place. And what it looks like, and also when Caroline showed me this slide that you're seeing right now, it was almost like she'd been watching me. That's what it felt like. It was like, those are the 5. It's like, oh yes, and yes, a clean sweep. I would literally be clearing up at bingo with a slide like this. And actually, apart from drugs and alcohol, to a certain extent on the alcohol front, all those things sometimes come back in as well. So I want to make sure we don't get across this point of, oh, there's some amazing story of, I think Caroline, you called it a unicorn moment, that everything's better, everything's perfect. But when I was, and also last bit on that point, in and out of doctors and specialists and whatever my mum, who was a single parent family I grew up in, could afford to get me into, because they just couldn't find out the answers. I was just misdiagnosed the whole way along and given medication that was wrong for me and caused further problems. And at 36, I was lucky enough, so I think we can go to the next slide here now, if you like, Caroline, because at 36, I was lucky enough to see a specialist. And I know that not everybody can. I'm very conscious of that. And I was discussing with Caroline about this. But, what I would say is, if you've got private medical, look into it. Sometimes these medical insurances still need to have a special bursary on top of that. They still don't recognise ADHD, or they do recognise it, but can't insure it. Secondly, talk to your workplace about that. Thirdly, I'll just be really clear about this. If you can afford it, I'd ask you to consider, if you really feel like, and you're curious and you understand yourself and you've not ever had the answer, just question you a little bit on how much you're spending on maybe clothes or holidays. Just spare that little bit of money for your mind. And if not, talk to Caroline after this, because Crease Puddle can really help you. This area. Why diagnosis is important, and I guess my title of number point 2 is, improved but in the wrong mold. And when I was 18, I had a bit of a family intervention from other parts of my family. I was picked up off the floor, quite literally in some cases, just heading for the abyss, basically. I got into various communities. I met my now wife, Liz, who I never thought we would be together this long. She's been a rock throughout all of this for me. And it really helped me. And there were lots of improvements, and there were and then other medications and other help. But the answers weren't there, and I was still me, and I was still slipping up with impulse. One of the leading characteristics for me in my diagnosis is lack of impulse control. And so, another, I guess, 10, 15 years pass of me, thinking it was all fixed, all the issues of my childhood, but it weren't, because I was still slipping up. I was still drinking myself until I blacked out, and slipping up with drugs and saying the wrong things and being obtuse and blurting out words. Some of it's quite funny, but some of it's quite heartbreaking, and difficult when I look back. Caroline, thank you. Caroline, something you said about blurting out words. I was once at a community group. I walked into a lounge. There were far too many people in this lounge for my liking. You could hear everything from the people eating their cake. You could hear the sensory overload was too much. And right at the end of this, having to sit and concentrate for so long and trying to not, trying to fit into the mold that everyone else was doing, the chap leading it at the front said, has anyone got any announcements? And the silence for me was such a pregnant pause. I ended up blurting out, I'm pregnant. And then just basically ran out the room. And it's very difficult. And people who have worked with me and live with me, some of it can be hilariously funny, and some of it can just be, oh God, that's just too triggering environment. Thirdly and lastly, post-diagnosis, the title I've got is I'm the most optimal to date. There's certainly no I'm fixed moment, right? But there is so much that has been fixed since I've been diagnosed and medicated. And some of you would have seen on LinkedIn in October that I did a diary of living with ADHD every day for a week. You can go back and look at those videos. I did that in association with NABS, which is a charity that supports the media industry. And yeah, I talk about tics and fiddlers and stimming, like stuff like that, fidget spinners and what medication does. Medication for me has been a lifesaver. Yeah, it's meant complete impulse control when I am medicated. It has made me an all-round person. My brother-in-law said a really funny thing to me once. He said, you were once like a lemon meringue and now you're like a more well-rounded roast to be around. I just thought that was a really funny picture of it all. I have more time, I'm more balanced, I'm more present, I'm definitely happier. But, there are still things like the tics and the the issues with acceptance and shame. That stuff continues to carry on. And sometimes I wonder if I should be grateful for my anxiety, because it's got me this far, but it's now my next thing, I guess, is I'm trying to question is what fuel would carry me in the next 39 years, moving away from that hyper focus, all the things Caroline said, I completely relate to. Get help, don't wait till your crisis. For me, my journey was through a mental health first aider who was very understanding. She was a bit of a unicorn, if I'm honest, amazing person.
1 minute.
1 minute, thanks Caroline, I saw that. But talk to your mental health first aiders at work, talk to a friend, talk to the doctor. If you don't get answers, go to another doctor and go to another. One of the things people actually suffer with is a lack of patience, and it's not, but you mustn't give up, because once you get those answers, even if it's no, you haven't got that, you've got this, you have understanding, it can be a literal life changer. And I think rather than squeeze anything else in the last 30 seconds, I'll stop there, Caroline. Hopefully that was of use.
Yeah, certainly is, Jack. Thank you for that. I know that Jack has such a huge story and some real kind of lived experience of mental health challenges. To try and get them into to sort of just over 10 minutes was always going to be a challenge, because he has so much value to give. So thanks for that, Jack. That's super, super important. I think that pulling it out for me there is about being innovative and thinking about different things and never giving up, because the answers are out there, and it is so much of that is about finding the right therapies, the right medication, the right understanding, the right environments, the right employer. All of that, and you can go to there is specific signposting that you can use, like crisis resorts from Autistica. Have a little look on there. Mental health from the NAS. There's ADHD and Mental Health ADHD Foundation. You can get, like, I think you're going to get a copy of these slides anyway. Dyslexia, creating an environment of poor mental health from BDA, the British Dyslexia Association. And I know a lot of these are UK based, but they absolutely will be relevant around the world as well. And then there's this. So Dr. Luke Bearden, who works out of the Autism Centre at Sheffield Hallam, he's certainly a friend of Crease Puddles, and we're a huge fan of his. And he talks about anxiety not being the sole domain of the autistic population, but he talks about it, for most of the neurotypical population compared to most of the autistic population, there will be less overall ongoing anxiety, less frequency, less duration, less intensity, and fewer days during which anxiety is experienced. And this is why I reiterate, it's the intersectionality of neurodivergence and mental health where the real learning needs to happen. And I leave you with Alan Turing. So Dr. Alan Turing, who was instrumental in the activities at Bletchley Park in the Second World War, and it's said that he reduced the war by 4 years and saved over 14 million lives. And he was saying that sometimes it's he said that sometimes it's the people that no one imagines anything of, that do the things that no one can imagine. But you're only going to be able to benefit from different thinkers, from people as amazing as Dr. Alan Turing, as amazing as Jack, as amazing as Dr. Luke Beard, and as amazing as my team here at Crease Puddle. If you start addressing elements of mental health, and we need to start conversations, as uncomfortable as they are, about how we can carry on that conversation and develop it for the world as a whole. So thank you for that. And any questions?
Yeah, we have got plenty of questions that have come in during the session, so I'm just going to jump straight in so we can get through them. So, getting diagnosed is so difficult. Is it valid and accepted to say that you're self-diagnosed?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk from a UK perspective here. So certainly in the UK, we advocate for something what we call needs-led, and lots of organisations are going needs-led now. Lots of people are identifying with the characteristics of, say, autism or ADHD, and certainly under the Equality Act in UK law, the Equality Act 2010, you don't have to have a diagnosis to be afforded those protections under the Equality Act. But you do have to satisfy the definition of disability, obviously, to be afforded protections for that protected characteristic. So it's worth having a little look at that. There's lots of self-identification going on, and certainly organisations have really had to have a very deep conversation about what do we want to do at that point where somebody says, I think I am autistic, I think I am dyslexic. And there is, like I say, a growing populace that it is more about this needs-led. And actually, as an organisation, you know, surely all you want to do is get the best out of your people. That person wants to be happier, doing something maybe a little bit differently, or with a small or no cost reasonable adjustment. So there needs to be a challenge about why wouldn't you at least have that discussion prior to requesting any kind of medical assessment, if that was appropriate.
Thank you, Jack. Everyone's saying thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm just trying to find, there was a question as well. From
jumping on that last question quickly, is that all right? Just as well, like, this is my experience. Just on that last question.
Yeah, people were just saying, would you be happy to share your diagnosis?
Yeah, like really, like for me, it was through work, sort of basically funding me seeing a psychiatrist. So that's through a specialist. But you know, talk to Caroline, obviously, or Crease Puddle directly through the system there as well. If you can see a specialist privately, it will get done quicker. Or you can say to your GP, I want an ADHD assessment. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Lots of questions around working with neurodiverse people in the workplace, like interview techniques and just generally day-to-day working. Any tips or hints you can give?
Yeah, it's a little bit like, where do we stop? Because we've only got
7 minutes. 7 minutes and counting.
Okay, yeah, so right, okay, so hints and tips. But the one thing I really don't want anyone to do is say, can you give me one? Because never say that to somebody with ADHD, ever. And it's when I do lots of speaking pieces, everyone always, so Caroline, can you just give us one thing? It's like, no, I actually can't, because as soon as you say that, 6,000 things flow into my head. So just tip there. Right, in terms of employment, across the UK and beyond, there are big reviews taking place in all kinds of organisations, looking at their practices in terms of recruitment, retention and progression. And it depends on your resources, it depends on the budgets, it depends on your sector, it depends on the services, it depends on the resources you can draw down, the expertise that's already existing, lots of factors. Where we are seeing sort of some very small sort of practical changes in things like pre-disclosing questions before an interview, for example, looking at the reasonable adjustment piece. So what reasonable adjustments can we put in place for people, but then taking that a step further and looking at it in terms of inclusion. So it's not just kind of doing the bare minimum, but kind of like that. How do we get you to thrive? How do we How do we help you to be the best that you can be? Those two different camps really. But I appreciate that for some people, particularly smaller organisations, starting with reasonable adjustments and what does reasonable mean to you as an organisation, understanding that, knowing your pathways. So this is something which we have lots of conversations about. Somebody discloses, how does that information get to the right person, the right people? What about confidentiality, for example? How do you transfer information within an organisation in terms of through the recruitment process, through onboarding? What about your L&D? You know, have you considered different learners within onboarding and how different people prefer to learn? Are they visual? Are they audible? Are they read-write? Are they kinesthetic? Are they a blend of everybody, multimodal learners? Then you're looking at your promotion systems as well. So actually don't just stop at a great big sexy recruitment campaign. It's about keeping people there and progressing them so that you've actually got your role models. And what we know is that if you've got 30% of whatever rank it is or whatever level it is or whatever scale it is of that particular demographic, you're going to get people naturally gravitating, going, oh, that's my tribe. Oh, so they're autistic, they're ADHD. Oh, I'm going to go over there. That's really good. So if you want to increase the number of neurodivergent employees and staff, then start trying to make them visible, empowering them so they can talk about their neurodivergence within organisations. Workplace assessments are a great way of understanding the impact that your environments are having on people, and that also extends to when they're working at home. So if you want some returning to work guidance, go on our website. There is on the blog element of our website, there's a free to download guide about agile working, returning to the workplace, managing change for neurodivergent employees. Have it with our blessing, and hopefully there's some good stuff in there. And then also what the different roles are of HR, occupational health, line managers. Do they feel empowered? Do line managers, do they know what a reasonable adjustment is? Do they link in with occupational health? Does occupational health actually have that specialist knowledge? In our experience, not as much as what would be very useful in organisations. And empowering HR, because everyone goes to HR expecting them to know all the answers, and actually they quite often don't have all the answers, and it's no one's born with this knowledge. And we do loads of work with HR, empowering line managers and increasing that narrative in organisations. So yeah, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and it's a whole training course in itself. But yeah, there's lots of conversations going on about that sort of thing.
Brilliant, thank you. How do you bring up ADHD without seeming like you are creating excuses? This is where a lot of my anxiety comes from, feeling alone in dealing with it.
Do you want to take that one, Jack?
Yeah, happily. ADHD and shame, they go hand in hand. Unfortunately, that's a tricky one. It's difficult. You have to just do it. You have to say, you have to back yourself, right? You aren't going to get any better by staying silent. You have to let your manager know, because I feel like because if you don't, you are going to fit into a mold. And like I explained with my point 2 earlier, that is going to cause systemic problems elsewhere. You're going to go home it's like the shaking up Coke bottle analogy, where you stay shaking up throughout the day and then you get home and explode and whoever's waiting for you at home. And there's no way around it, which sounds scary, but just back yourself, read up on the facts about it, talk to people like myself and Caroline who are diagnosed and confident in this space now, to give yourself that support, but give you the tools how to get it across. Because one of the worst things people can say back to you is it's just an excuse. And actually, for anyone listening, that's something we nip in the bud from today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's also, if you find a good coach that can help you plan that conversation, and also provide them with solutions at the same time. So so you're not just kind of arriving with that information and then expecting them to know what to do with it. So already do your research, and plan in that time. Plan the conversation with somebody that is used to having difficult conversations, and be ready and aware of how tired that conversation is going to make you at the end of it.
Thank you. Someone asking here, would you consider being highly sensitive also as a neurodivergent condition?
Well, I'd like to know if that's a medical diagnosis or if that's because so highly sensitive. So sometimes in rejection sensitive dysphoria, that one of the descriptors is highly sensitive to negative feedback, for example. But it may well be that that person sees themselves as highly sensitive, or have they been told that they are highly sensitive? So I probably want to know a little bit more about that first, but not necessarily know. I mean, these can all be characteristics of just a person being a person. And that's why you need to know who you are going to in order to get the right assessment. So for ADHD and autism, you need to make sure that you are going to somebody who is trained in differentials for that diagnostic. Going to an occupational psychologist won't provide you with a diagnosis. They can do the assessments, but it has to be somebody who is a medical practitioner in order to give you a diagnostic, which is particularly, and again, this is all UK, and I apologise if you're outside of the UK and this isn't relevant. But you need to make sure, particularly in ADHD, that they can then take you on to consider medication, i.e. they call it a titration process. So that you need to make sure that you're getting in front of the right practitioner in order to look at, because it may well be sensory processing disorder because you're sensitive to the environment. It may well be that actually there's a hypersensitivity due to an acquired neurodivergence after, say, a head injury or something along those lines. It would be very hard to say without more information, and I'm not a psychologist, so that's not something I'd be happy to do. But it's important, I suppose, that the lesson out of that for me is to make sure that you are going to see somebody who can do what you want them to do, and you're paying the right amount of money for it.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's just gone 3 o'clock, so unfortunately that's all we've got time for, but we could have done another 2 hours just on questions, I think. Thank you so much, Jack and Caroline. Lots of people saying thank you for sharing your story, Jack, and for all the useful information and helpful tips you've given as well, Caroline and Jack. So before I end the session, I just want to let everybody know that we will pop up an evaluation form as the session ends, and if you could actually fill that out, we really appreciate your feedback, so that would be fantastic. Okay, so thank you to everyone for attending, and thank you again to both of you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody, and happy Neurodiversity Celebration Week, which is what it is this week.
Same to you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.